Hashtag desperate and abandoned. The alien beauty falls to her knees, begging a human to let her serve. The wind howled across the desolate landscape of Xylos, carrying dust particles that sparkled faintly in the dim light of a distant star. Kale adjusted his environmental settings as he trudged through the ruins of what must have once been a magnificent structure. Years of solitude had taught him to appreciate the eloquent silence of abandoned places, but there was something different about Xylos, a haunting quality that spoke of secrets buried beneath the rubble. He was 3 standard weeks into his survey mission. The Interstellar Salvage Guild wouldn't pay much for a basic planetary assessment, but if he found usable tech from the civilization that had once thrived here, the commission would be substantial. Not that he needed the credits anymore. Not since everything had fallen apart back in the colonies. Kale paused before a half-collapsed archway, running his scanner over the intricate symbols etched into the stone-like material. His device translated none of it, but the craftsmanship was undeniable. Whoever, or whatever, had built this place had possessed incredible skill and patience. Add architectural note to survey log, he spoke into his helmet mic. Evidence of advanced aesthetic sensibilities consistent with reports of Xylithian design philosophy. Continuing exploration of Eastern Quadrant. His footsteps echoed in the vast chamber beyond the archway. The ceiling soared impossibly high, disappearing into shadows despite the supplementary light from his suit. Columns, many still intact, supported what remained of the structure. It might have been a temple or perhaps some kind of governmental center. The distinction often blurred in ancient civilizations. The scanner on his wrist beeped softly, alerting him to an anomalous energy signature deeper within the ruins. Kale frowned. His preliminary orbital scan had shown no active power sources on this part of the planet. He checked his readings again, weak but undeniably present. Something was still functioning in this dead place. Curiosity overcame caution. He followed the signal, moving deeper into the complex, past fallen statues and crumbling walls. The energy signature grew stronger as he approached what appeared to be a sealed doorway, partially open with a faint blue-green glow emanating from within. Kale drew his pulse pistol, not out of immediate fear, but from the habits formed during years of solo exploration on the fringes. He'd encountered everything from territorial automated security systems to desperate refugees in places like this. Preparation had kept him alive. He slipped through the gap in the doorway and entered a vast circular chamber. Unlike the rest of the ruins, this room showed signs of more recent habitation. A makeshift shelter fashioned from metallic debris occupied one corner. Scattered personal items, or what he assumed were personal items, lay near it. And at the center of the room, beside what looked like a damaged console of some kind, was a figure. The figure turned to the sound of his entrance, and Kale froze. She was clearly female, clearly not human, and clearly terrified. Her skin had a pale blue-green sheen that seemed to shimmer slightly in the ambient light. Large amber eyes dominated a face that was both alien and strikingly beautiful by any species standards. Her frame was slender, almost fragile, clothed in what appeared to be the tattered remains of some kind of uniform. Rich fabric now dirty and torn, but with patterns that suggested careful design and purpose. For a moment, they simply stared at one another. Then something changed in the alien woman's expression. The fear remained, but it was joined by something else, a kind of desperate recognition. Before Kale could speak, she moved toward him with a swift, fluid grace that seemed almost choreographed. And then, to his absolute shock, she fell to her knees before him, bowing her head so low that it nearly touched the dust-covered floor. "Please." Her voice was melodic even in distress, speaking the common trade language with an accent that elongated the vowels. "Please, master, allow me to serve you. I will be most useful. Do not leave me here. I can do anything." The words tumbled out in a desperate rush, each syllable edged with raw panic. Her slender hands were clasped before her in supplication, and Kale could see that they were trembling. The posture was one of complete submission, practiced, ingrained, and and utterly unexpected. Kale lowered his weapon immediately, instinctively stepping back. "I'm not," he began, then stopped, unsure of what to say. "Please stand up. I'm not going to hurt you." His words seemed to confuse her further. The alien woman remained where she was, her amber eyes now darting up to his face before quickly returning to the floor. The trembling in her hands intensified. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Have I displeased you already? I can serve better. Please tell me how to serve." The desperation in her voice made something twist uncomfortably in Kale's chest. He holstered his weapon and slowly, deliberately, removed his helmet, allowing her to see his human face, to see that he was no threat. The air was thin but breathable for short periods, according to his scans. "I don't want you to serve me," he said quietly, keeping his distance. "I'm just a surveyor. I found your energy signature. I was curious." The confusion in those amber eyes deepened. She remained kneeling, her posture rigid with tension. Kale realized that she feared abandonment more than she feared him. The implication of that realization was troubling. Silence settled between them, heavy with unasked questions and unspoken fears. Outside, the wind continued its mournful song through the ruins of a dead civilization, while inside, two beings from different worlds regarded each other with uncertainty. Kale sat down on a piece of fallen masonry, careful to maintain a non-threatening distance. He placed his helmet beside him and made his posture as casual and unthreatening as possible. The alien woman remained kneeling, watching him with those extraordinary amber eyes, confusion evident in every line of her body. "My name is Kale," he offered, his voice gentle. "I'm a human surveyor. I'm exploring these ruins for my work." He gestured vaguely at the crumbling chamber around them. "I'm not looking for servants." She remained silent, though her eyes never left his face. There was something calculating in that gaze now, as though she were trying to decode a particularly difficult puzzle. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't require service." Kale shook his head. "No, I don't." He considered his next words carefully. "What's your name? How did you come to be here alone?" For a moment, he thought she wouldn't answer. Her slender hands clenched and unclenched reflexively. "I'm called Lyra," she said at last. It sounded like a reluctant confession. "I was left behind when the masters departed. The temple complex was abandoned." "How long ago?" Kale asked, trying to keep his tone conversational rather than interrogative. Lyra's gaze dropped again. "Many cycles. I do not know exactly. The chronometers failed after the first season." Kale reached for his pack slowly, telegraphing his movements. He extracted a water container and a nutrient bar, extending them toward her, though not so close that she would need to approach him and take them. "Are you hungry? Thirsty? Please take these." Lyra stared at the offered items with naked longing, but made no move to accept them. She glanced from the water to Kale's face and back again, as though expecting some kind of trick or test. "I haven't earned sustenance," she said softly, the words carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "You don't need to earn it," Kale replied, keeping his voice steady despite the rush of anger he felt toward whoever had instilled such beliefs. "It's freely given. No conditions." Still, she hesitated, the internal struggle visible on her expressive face. Need ward with deeply ingrained training. Finally, desperation won out. She inched forward on her knees and reached for the water with both hands, accepting it with a small bow of her head that seemed entirely reflexive. Kale watched as she drank tentatively at first, then with increasing urgency as her body's needs overrode caution. She consumed the nutrient bar in the same careful yet desperate manner, her eyes occasionally darting to his face as though expecting him to snatch the food away at any moment. "Thank you, Moss." She stopped herself, uncertainty clouding her features. "Thank you." "You're welcome, Lyra," Kale replied, deliberately using her name. "Would you like more water now, or would you prefer to wait a while?" The question, simple as it was, seemed to perplex her deeply. Her brow furrowed, and she looked at him with such genuine confusion that Kale felt that uncomfortable twist in his chest again. I don't understand what you're asking me, she admitted, the words seeming to cost her something precious. I'm offering you a choice, Kale explained gently. You can have more water now if you're still thirsty, or you can wait until later. It's entirely up to you. Lyra's amber eyes widened slightly. She looked down at the container in her hands, then back to Kale's face, searching for some hint of the correct response. What would please you? She asked finally. What would please me is for you to decide what you need, Kale countered, keeping his voice patient. Your body, your choice. Minutes passed in silence as Lyra visibly struggled with this concept. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely audible. I would like more water. Now. The last word was added with something like defiance, as though she expected punishment for expressing a preference. Kale simply smiled and handed her another water container. Good choice. As Lyra drank more cautiously this time, Kale observed the small marks on her slender wrists and neck, evidence, perhaps, of restraints or control devices. Her movements, while graceful, had a practiced quality to them, as though choreographed to minimize space and attention. She flinched at a sudden noise from above, merely the settling of the ancient structure, and her body instinctively shifted to a more submissive posture before she caught herself. Lyra, Kale said softly, once she had finished drinking, I think I should explain why I'm here. I'm surveying this planet, Xylos, for potential salvage opportunities. I fly a small ship. I'm alone. You have no other people with you? She asked, a complex emotion crossing her face. No, just me. And you truly require no service? No companionship? No. She trailed off, but her meaning was clear enough. No, Kale said firmly. I require none of those things. The confusion returned to Lyra's expression, perhaps deeper than before. Then why? She began, then stopped, apparently unable to formulate the question properly. Why am I talking to you? Kale suggested. Because you're a person in need, and I'm not the kind of man who leaves people in need when I can help. Those words seemed to trouble her even more. She set the water container down carefully and folded her hands in her lap, her posture still one of deference despite the fact that she was now sitting rather than kneeling. I was taught that my value lies in service, she said after a long moment, each word measured carefully. That without a master to serve, I am, without purpose, defective. Who taught you that? Kale asked, unable to keep a hint of anger from his voice. Lyra blinked, surprised by his tone. The teachers, from my earliest awareness, is the way of the Xylithian hierarchy. Each has their place. Mine is to serve. And what is the place of these? Teachers. They serve the high masters by preparing beings like me for our purpose, Lyra answered, as though reciting a fundamental truth. It is efficiency. Harmony. It sounds like slavery, Kale said bluntly. Lyra flinched as though he had raised a hand to her. No, it is honor. Purpose. But there was a new note in her voice. Uncertainty. Perhaps the first crack in the foundation of her beliefs. Were you born into this role, or were you placed into it? Kale asked, his tone softening. Lyra's gaze dropped again. I was created for it. Modified. Enhanced to be pleasing. Trained to be useful. She gestured vaguely at her own form. Designed. The implications of her words settled heavily in the chamber. Kale felt sick at the thought of an entire civilization that would engineer sentient beings specifically for servitude. He had heard rumors of the Xylithians' biological experimentation, of course, but the reality of it sitting before him was far more disturbing than any second-hand account. And now? The teachers, the masters, they're gone, he asked gently. They departed when the resource depletion became critical, Lyra confirmed. Only the essential personnel and property were evacuated. I was deemed non-essential. The pain in those last words was raw, exposed. A waste of transport resources. Before Kale could respond, a deep rumbling sound reverberated through the chamber. Dust and small fragments of stone rained down from above. The ruins were shifting, whether from natural causes or the disturbance of their presence. He couldn't tell. "This area isn't stable," he said, standing quickly and retrieving his helmet. "We should move to a safer location. Will you come with me, Lyra?" She looked up at him, genuine fear in her eyes, not of him now, but of the groaning structure around them. Another rumble, louder this time, made the decision for her. She rose to her feet with that same fluid grace and nodded. "I will follow," she said simply. Kale led the way back toward the entrance, moving carefully through the unstable passages. The scanner on his wrist showed increasing structural instability, a chain reaction of failures spreading through the ancient complex. Behind him, Lyra moved with surprising surety, her knowledge of the ruins evident in how she navigated the crumbling corridors. They had almost reached the outer chambers when a section of the ceiling gave way directly in their path. Kale stumbled backward, narrowly avoiding being crushed by the falling debris. The passage was now completely blocked. "There's another way," Lyra said urgently, touching his arm briefly before snatching her hand back as though burned. "Through the lower levels. Follow me." She turned and moved swiftly down a side passage that Kale hadn't noticed before. He followed without hesitation, trusting her knowledge of the complex. The passage descended steeply, leading them into areas that hadn't been touched by sunlight in centuries. They emerged into a vast underground hall, its ceiling supported by massive columns. Unlike the ruins above, this chamber appeared largely intact, though covered in dust and showing signs of abandonment. Lyra led him across the hall to another passage, this one sloping upward. "This will take us to the northern exit," she explained as they climbed. "It's farther from where you entered, but more stable." "You know this place well," Kale observed, his breathing slightly labored from the climb and the thin air. "I have had much time to explore," she replied, her tone carefully neutral, "when not in stasis." Before Kale could ask about this stasis, another violent tremor shook the passage. A large chunk of ceiling broke loose directly above them. Without thinking, Lyra grabbed Kale's arm and yanked him aside with surprising strength, pulling them both clear as the debris crashed down where he had been standing. For a moment, they stood pressed together in the narrow passage, the dust settling around them. Lyra's amber eyes were wide with something like shock at her own actions. She released his arm abruptly and stepped back, her head lowering. "Forgive me for touching you without permission," she said, her voice tight with fear. "I did not mean to overstep." "Lyra," Kale said firmly, "you just saved my life." "Thank you." She looked up, clearly startled by the gratitude. Before she could respond, another tremor reminded them of their precarious situation. They continued upward, emerging finally into the fading daylight of Xylos. In the distance, a massive dust storm was approaching, its leading edge a wall of swirling particles tinted orange by the setting sun. "We need shelter," Kale said, assessing the situation quickly. "That storm will hit within the hour, and my ship is too far to reach before it does." Lyra pointed to a low structure about half a kilometer away. "The Keeper's dwelling remains largely intact. It has sealed rooms designed to withstand environmental extremes." Kale nodded. "Lead the way." They made their way across the ruined landscape, the wind growing stronger with each passing minute. By the time they reached the structure, the air was filled with stinging particles that limited visibility to a few meters. Lyra led Kale through a narrow entrance and into a series of small rooms. The innermost chamber had a heavy door that she sealed behind them, cutting off the howling of the wind. The room was dusty but surprisingly well preserved. It contained simple furniture, what might have been a sleeping platform, a few storage units, and a table-like surface. The air was stale but breathable. "We'll be safe here until the storm passes," Lyra said, moving automatically to clear dust from the surfaces. The Keeper's dwellings were built to endure. "Who was the Keeper?" Kale asked, setting down his pack. "A guardian of the temple archives," Lyra explained. "Lower in the hierarchy than a teacher, but still respected. They were permitted private quarters due to their duties." Kale removed his environmental gear, keeping only his basic clothing. "Thank you for bringing us here," he said sincerely. And thank you again for saving me from that falling debris. Lyra paused in her cleaning, seeming unsure how to respond to continued gratitude. It was instinct, she admitted finally. I did not think. Sometimes instincts are more trustworthy than thoughts, Cale observed, sitting down on a cleared portion of what seemed to be a bench. Especially thoughts that others have placed in our minds. Lyra's hand stilled completely. She stood motionless, her back to him, absorbed in some internal struggle. When she finally turned to face him, there was something new in her expression, a question forming that she had perhaps never dared to ask before. "Why do you believe I have value beyond service?" she asked, the words careful, measured, as though she were handling something explosive. Cale considered his response thoughtfully. "Because all sentient beings have inherent value," he said at last. "Their worth doesn't depend on their usefulness to others. It's intrinsic to their existence, even if they were created specifically to serve." Lyra pressed, moving closer, her amber eyes intent on his face. "Even then," Cale confirmed, "the purpose someone else assigns to you doesn't define your actual worth. You exist. That's enough." Lyra sank down onto the bench beside him, maintaining a careful distance, but closer than she had willingly come before. Outside, the storm raged, wind howling against the ancient walls that somehow still held firm. "On my world," Cale continued after a moment, "there was a time when some humans enslaved others. They claimed these people were naturally inferior, meant to serve. It took centuries, but eventually most of humanity recognized the fundamental wrong in that thinking. No sentient being exists merely to serve another. But I was designed for it," Lyra said, her slender hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Modified genetically, conditioned from earliest consciousness. If that is removed, what remains of me?" The question hung in the air between them, profound in its simplicity and its pain. Cale felt the weight of it, knew that his answer mattered in ways he couldn't fully comprehend. "You remain," he said gently. "The core of you that persisted despite the conditioning. The part that kept you alive when they abandoned you. The part that saved my life today, not because I commanded it, but because you chose to act. That's who you are beyond the service. The being who makes choices." Lyra's eyes shimmered with moisture that she quickly blinked away. "I don't know how to be that person," she whispered. "I only know how to fulfill expectations." "You can learn," Cale assured her, "starting with small choices and building from there." They sat in silence for a long while, listening to the storm. Eventually, Cale shared some of his rations with Lyra. This time, she accepted them without the earlier hesitation, though she still watched his reactions carefully as she ate. "May I ask why you are alone?" Lyra ventured after they had eaten. "Humans are social beings, yet you travel the void without companions." Cale's expression darkened slightly. "I used to work with others," he said after a moment. "I was part of a colonial science team on Vermilion 4. We were studying atmospheric enhancement techniques to make marginally habitable planets more suitable for multiple species." He paused, the memories still painful after all this time. "There was an accident. An experimental compound proved unstable in ways our models hadn't predicted. 3 of my colleagues died. One of them was—" He swallowed hard. "Someone very important to me." "I'm sorry," Lyra said softly, and the simple sincerity in those words touched something in Cale that had been numb for a very long time. "The colonial authority cleared me of wrongdoing," he continued, "but I couldn't stay. I've been doing independent survey work ever since. It's safer for everyone if I work alone." "You blame yourself still," Lyra observed, her perception surprisingly acute. Cale nodded slightly. "I was the project leader. The responsibility was mine. Yet you cannot serve others if you isolate yourself," Lyra said, then looked surprised at her own words, as though the thought had emerged unbidden. "I'm not trying to serve," Cale replied. "I'm trying not to cause harm." "There is a difference," Lyra acknowledged. "I'm only beginning to understand it." The storm continued through the night. They took turns resting, though Cale noticed that Lyra seemed reluctant to sleep in his presence, perhaps fearing vulnerability, perhaps simply conditioned to remain alert in the presence of a master. Eventually, Exhaustion overcame her wariness, and she slept curled against the wall, her features softening in repose, looking younger and more vulnerable. Morning brought relative calm. The storm had passed, though the air remained hazy with suspended particles. They emerged from the keeper's dwelling to find the landscape transformed, some structures more exposed, others partially buried by drifting dust. The ruins had a different quality in the early light, less foreboding, almost peaceful. "We should be able to reach my ship now," Kale said, checking his navigation device. "It's about 5 kilometers northeast of here." Lyra nodded, but there was tension in her posture again, uncertainty about what would happen next. "What will you do with your survey findings?" she asked as they began walking. "File my report with the guild," Kale replied. "Note the architectural and cultural significance of the ruins. Probably recommend preservation rather than salvage." "And what of me?" The question was asked with forced casualness that didn't mask the fear behind it. Kale stopped walking and turned to face her directly. "That depends entirely on what you want, Lyra. I won't decide your fate for you." She stared at him, those remarkable amber eyes wide with confusion. "What I want," she repeated slowly, as though testing an unfamiliar language. "I don't know what I want. I've never been permitted to want." "Then perhaps that's where you start," Kale suggested gently. "By giving yourself permission to want things, to make choices. You can stay here if that's your preference. Or you can come with me, at least temporarily, until you decide what you want your life to be. You would allow me to accompany you without expectations." The concept seemed almost beyond her comprehension. "Yes," Kale said simply, "as a fellow traveler, not a servant." They continued their journey across the ruined landscape in silence, Lyra clearly deep in thought. Kale didn't press her for a decision, understanding that this might be the first truly significant choice she had ever been allowed to make. They had been walking for nearly an hour, when Kale's scanner began emitting a series of rapid beeps. He frowned, studying the display. "Something's approaching," he said tensely, fast and mechanical. Coming from the south. Lyra's face drained of color. "An enforcer drone," she whispered. They were left behind to maintain the temples, to ensure that all servants remained at their posts until final evacuation or resource depletion. "Will it recognize you?" Kale asked urgently. She nodded, fear evident in every line of her body. "It will attempt to return me to my assigned station. It will perceive you as an unauthorized intruder." Even as she spoke, a sleek metallic shape appeared on the horizon, moving with unnatural speed across the ruined landscape. It was roughly ovoid, approximately 2 meters long, with multiple appendages folded against its body as it traveled. Its surface gleamed silver in the morning light, untouched by the dust that covered everything else on Xylos. "Options?" Kale asked, assessing their surroundings for potential cover or defensive positions. "Compliance or deactivation," Lyra replied automatically, then shook her head as if to clear it. "No, the drones are powerful but single-minded. They operate on recognition patterns and command protocols. They're not truly intelligent." The drone was closing rapidly. Kale could now see the Xylithian symbols etched into its surface, similar to those in the temple, but more utilitarian. He drew his pulse pistol, though he had no idea if it would be effective against the drone's armor. "Lyra," he said urgently, "hide behind that outcropping. I'll try to disable it." "No." Her response was immediate and forceful. I can handle this, but I need you to trust me and follow my lead." Kale hesitated only a moment before nodding. "I trust you." The drone slowed as it approached, its appendages unfolding to reveal manipulators and what appeared to be scanning equipment. It hovered a few meters away, multifaceted optical sensors focusing first on Lyra, then on Kale. "Servant designation Lyra, 7629, the drone intoned in a flat, artificial voice speaking the common trade language. "You have deviated from your assigned zone without authorization. Return to station immediately. Unidentified life form detected. Unauthorized presence in sacred precinct. Removal protocols initiated." One of the drone's appendages transformed, reconfiguring into what was unmistakably a weapon. It oriented toward Kale. Hold, Lyra commanded, her voice suddenly carrying an authority that Kale had not heard before. She straightened her posture and stepped forward. Command override. Authorization sequence. Asterisk Prime. Zenith Protocol. Master line. The drone paused, its optical sensors focusing solely on Lyra now. Authorization sequence recognized. Awaiting command clarification. Lyra's face betrayed no emotion, though Kale could see the tension in her shoulders. This human is under my protection as part of Experimental Protocol 739. Stand down weapons and await new instructions. For a moment, the drone remained motionless. Then its weapon appendage reconfigured back to a manipulator, standing by for instructions. Lyra's voice remained steady. New primary directive. Deactivate all enforcement protocols in this sector. Return to maintenance bay and enter standby mode until further notice. The drone processed this command, its optical sensors still fixed on Lyra. Verification required. Provide High Master authentication code. Without hesitation, Lyra responded with a complex series of sounds, clicks, tones, and syllables that didn't resemble any language Kale had ever heard. The drone's sensors flashed briefly. Authentication accepted. Enforcement protocols deactivated for Sector 17. Returning to maintenance bay. The drone's appendages folded back against its body. It turned and moved away, accelerating rapidly until it disappeared over the horizon for which it had come. Kale stared at Lyra in amazement. How did you do that? She turned to him, her amber eyes wide with something like shock at her own actions. I remembered. The teachers would sometimes use override commands when drones malfunctioned. I was present during many such incidents. We were expected to observe and learn, but never to speak or interfere. And the authentication code? Kale pressed, still processing what he had witnessed. A fabrication, Lyra admitted, a hint of wonder in her voice. The drone systems are old, degraded after so many cycles without maintenance. I gambled that its verification protocols would be similarly compromised. A small, disbelieving smile touched her lips. I lied to it. Successfully. You did more than that, Kale said, holstering his weapon. You took control of the situation. You made a choice and acted on it. Not to serve, but to protect both of us. Lyra stood still, seemingly overwhelmed by the implications. I did, she whispered. Ishos. They continued their journey toward Kale's ship in silence. Though it was a different quality of silence now, contemplative rather than fearful. The drone encounter had shifted something fundamental in Lyra's perception of herself. Kale could see it in her posture, in the way she now surveyed their surroundings with active interest rather than passive acceptance. They crested a ridge, and there in the shallow valley below sat Kale's ship, the Nomad, a medium-sized survey vessel with clean lines and a few visible modifications that spoke of years of practical use. It wasn't beautiful by conventional standards, but it was well-maintained and, most importantly, it was capable of interstellar travel. That's your vessel? Lyra asked, pausing at the top of the ridge. Home for the last 5 years, Kale confirmed. Not luxurious, but comfortable enough for one person. Or two, if necessary, he added carefully. They descended the slope to the ship. Kale activated the external scanner with his wrist device, confirming that the vessel remained secure and uncompromised during his absence. The entry ramp extended smoothly as they approached. Inside, the Nomad was compact but efficiently designed. The main cabin served as both control center and living space, with a small galley area, a workstation, and comfortable seating. Corridors branched off to the engine room, storage areas, and personal quarters. Lyra hesitated at the entrance to the main cabin, her eyes moving over the controls and equipment with obvious fascination, but also uncertainty. You can come in, Kale said gently. Explore if you'd like. Nothing here is off limits. She entered cautiously, her movements still carrying that ingrained gracefulness. Her fingers trailed lightly over the edge of the navigation console, the texture of the seating material, the smooth metal of a support beam. Kale realized she was using touch to connect with her surroundings in a way that had perhaps been forbidden to her before. experiencing rather than merely observing. "It's alive," she said softly. "Not like the temple. This has purpose, energy." "It's a good ship," Kale agreed, settling into the pilot's chair and beginning pre-flight checks. "Reliable. Adaptable." Lyra continued her tentative exploration of the cabin while Kale worked. Eventually, she came to stand beside his chair, watching the sequence of commands and responses on the control panels with evident interest. "Have you made your decision?" Kale asked quietly, not looking up from his work. "About whether to stay or come with me?" Lyra was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice held a new quality, tentative but deliberate. "If I come with you, what would be expected of me?" "Nothing would be expected," Kale replied, finally turning to meet her gaze. "That's the point. You would be free to find your own way, to discover what you want your life to be. I can offer transportation, basic necessities, and perhaps friendship. Nothing more, nothing less. And if I choose to stay," Kale considered this carefully, "then I would leave you with supplies sufficient for several months. Communications equipment to signal any passing ships, if that's what you eventually wanted. The choice would remain yours." Lyra closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, there was a clarity there that hadn't been present before. "I wish to leave Xylos," she said simply. "I have nothing here but memories of servitude." "Then welcome aboard the Nomad," Kale said with a small smile. "The ship has a second crew cabin. It's small, but it's private. Your space to do with as you choose." The concept of private space seemed to affect Lyra deeply. She nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Then, with visible effort at assertiveness, she asked, "May I retrieve something from the temple before we depart? There's an item of personal significance." "Of course," Kale agreed immediately, recognizing the importance of this request, perhaps the first true expression of personal desire Lyra had permitted herself. "We have time." They made the journey back to the temple complex in comfortable silence. Lyra led the way directly to the chamber where Kale had first found her. There, from a hidden compartment in the damaged console, she extracted a small object wrapped in a scrap of iridescent fabric. She unwrapped it carefully to reveal what appeared to be a crystal prism, no larger than her palm, with intricate patterns etched into its facets. In the dim light of the chamber, it caught and refracted the few beams that penetrated the ruins, creating tiny rainbows on the dusty floor. "This was given to me by another servant," Lyra explained softly, her fingers tracing the patterns on the crystal surface. "She was older, from an earlier generation. Before the final evacuation order came, she told me that this had been passed down among our kind for many cycles. A reminder that even in darkness, we can create light of our own." Her amber eyes met Kale's, vulnerable yet resolute. "I had to hide it. Such possessions were forbidden. Personal attachments were considered inefficient." Kale nodded, understanding the significance of this small act of rebellion. "It's beautiful," he said simply. Lyra rewrapped the crystal carefully and tucked it into a fold of her tattered garment. She looked around the chamber one last time, her expression unreadable. Then, with a small but decisive gesture, she removed an ornate band from her wrist, a delicate piece of metalwork that Kale had assumed was merely decorative, and placed it on the console. "A tracker," she explained in response to his questioning look. "All servants wear them. It's how the drones locate us if we stray from our assigned areas." Her fingers lingered on the band for a moment before withdrawing. "I won't need it anymore." The gesture was symbolic, powerful in its simplicity. Kale said nothing, recognizing that words would diminish the moment. Together, they left the chamber and made their way back to the ship. The pre-flight sequence was already complete when they returned. Kale took his place at the controls while Lyra settled into the second seat, her posture still formal but noticeably less rigid than before. "Ready?" Kale asked, his hand hovering over the launch initiator. Lyra gazed through the viewport at the ruins of the temple complex, her prison and home for so long. The fading light of day cast long shadows across the alien landscape, lending the ruins a strange, haunting beauty despite their abandonment. "Yes," she said finally, with quiet certainty. I'm ready. The Nomad lifted smoothly from the surface of Xylos, ascending through the thin atmosphere into the star-filled blackness of space. Lyra watched through the viewport, her amber eyes reflecting the receding planet and the vast expanse that now opened before her. What happens now? She asked, her voice barely audible over the gentle hum of the ship's systems. Now, Kale replied, we navigate. Days became a rhythm aboard the Nomad. Kale maintained his survey duties, meticulously documenting his findings from Xylos, while plotting a course to the nearest guild outpost, where he could submit his report. Lyra observed everything with increasing curiosity: the operation of the ship, the star charts, the process of cataloging artifacts and observations. She asked questions cautiously at first, then with growing confidence, as Kale consistently responded with patience and respect. The small crew cabin became a space of discovery for Lyra. Kale showed her how to adjust the environmental controls to her preference, how to operate the entertainment system, how to secure the door for privacy. These simple acts of autonomy were revelations to her. You can arrange the room however you like, Kale told her, watching as she explored the modest space. Change the lighting, rearrange the furniture. It's your domain. Lyra ran her slender fingers over the plain bedding, the utilitarian storage compartments. I've never had a domain before, she said thoughtfully. Only assignments. Over the following weeks, small changes appeared in her cabin. The bedding was rearranged into an unfamiliar configuration that Kale assumed was more comfortable for Xylithian physiology. The lighting was adjusted to a spectrum that leaned toward the amber end, reminiscent, perhaps, of her home world rather than the harsh blue whites of the temple. The crystal prism was displayed prominently on a small shelf, catching and dispersing light in complex patterns. They established routines that allowed for both shared time and privacy. Kale was careful never to issue commands, always framing suggestions as questions or options. At first, Lyra struggled with this approach, often looking to him for direction or approval before acting. Gradually, however, she began to express preferences, small ones initially, then more significant. I find I enjoy the texture of this food more than that one, she would say, or I would prefer to read rather than watch the entertainment feed tonight. Each expressed preference seemed to surprise and delight her, as though she were discovering pieces of herself that had been buried beneath years of conditioning. The touch barrier between them dissolved slowly, cautiously. The first deliberate contact came when Lyra reached out to stop Kale from adjusting a control panel incorrectly, her fingers lightly touching his wrist. Both froze at the contact, Lyra's eyes widening in momentary panic before Kale smiled reassuringly. Thank you, he said simply. That would have been a mistake. After that, occasional contact became part of their interaction, a light touch on the arm to draw attention, the brief contact of hands when passing objects. Kale was careful never to initiate contact in ways that might be perceived as demanding or controlling, allowing Lyra to set the boundaries of their physical interaction. One evening, as they shared a meal in the main cabin, Lyra asked a question that had clearly been weighing on her mind. What will happen when we reach the guild outpost? Kale set down his utensil, giving the question the consideration it deserved. The outpost is primarily a trading hub. There will be people from many different species and cultures. It can be overwhelming if you're not accustomed to it. I've never been among many different beings, Lyra admitted. In the temple, there were only Xylithians and other servants. You don't have to leave the ship if you don't want to, Kale assured her. But if you do, I'll be with you. No one there will know what you are or where you came from unless you choose to tell them. Lyra was silent for a moment, absently tracing patterns on the table's surface with one slender finger. I'm not sure who I am yet, she said finally, but I know who I don't want to be anymore. That's a significant beginning, Kale observed. When the outpost appeared on their scanners 3 days later, Lyra stood beside Kale at the viewport, watching as the sprawling structure grew larger against the backdrop of a blue-tinged gas giant. The outpost was a collection of interconnected modules and docking platforms, bustling with ships of various designs and origins. It's beautiful, Lyra breathed, her eyes wide with wonder. So many lights. So much life. Kale guided the Nomad to their assigned docking bay with practiced ease. Once they were securely attached to the outpost, he turned to Lyra. "We'll be here for about 3 standard days," he explained. "I need to file my report with the guild representative and restock our supplies. The decision about whether to explore the outpost is entirely yours. There's no wrong choice." Lyra's hands were clasped tightly in front of her, but her gaze was steady. "I want to see it," she said. "Not alone, but I want to see." Kale nodded, understanding both her courage and her fear. "We'll go together, at your pace. If it becomes too much at any point, we return to the ship immediately. No questions asked." Before disembarking, Kale helped Lyra select more suitable clothing from the ship's modest stores. Her tattered Xylithian serving garments would attract unwanted attention and questions. The practical jumpsuit she chose was slightly too large for her slender frame, but with adjustments, it served well enough. Lyra studied her reflection in the small mirror of her cabin with evident fascination, turning this way and that to observe the transformation. "It hides what I am," she noted, her tone neutral. "It allows you to choose what to reveal," Kale corrected gently. "There's a difference." Their first venture into the outpost was brief, but significant. Lyra stayed close to Kale's side as they navigated the main concourse, her amber eyes taking in everything. The diverse beings moving purposefully in all directions, the shops and service centers lining the curved walls, the constant hum of activity and commerce. She flinched occasionally at loud noises or sudden movements, but remained determinedly at Kale's side. They visited only a few essential locations: the guild office where Kale submitted his survey data, a supply depot to arrange for restocking, and a small food vendor where Kale purchased an assortment of items that might appeal to Lyra's Xylithian tastes. Throughout, Kale observed Lyra's reactions, ready to retreat to the ship at the first sign of overwhelming distress. But while she was clearly overwhelmed by the sensory input, she showed no desire to flee. So many beings, she marveled quietly as they made their way back to the docking bay. All different, all with purpose. Yet none seemed to be serving others in the way I was taught. "They serve each other through exchange," Kale explained. "Goods, services, information, all freely traded according to mutual agreement." Lyra considered this. "Mutual," she repeated thoughtfully. "Equal value on both sides. Not submission." "Exactly," Kale confirmed. "At least in theory. Reality is sometimes more complicated, of course." Back aboard the Nomad, Lyra retreated to her cabin for several hours, longer than she had ever isolated herself before. When she finally emerged, there was a new determination in her expression. "I want to go out again tomorrow," she announced. "Alone. Not far, just by myself." "Is that possible?" Kale couldn't hide his surprise, though he quickly masked it. "Of course it's possible," he said. "It might be wise to stay in the more public areas of the concourse, and perhaps take a communicator in case you need anything." Lyra nodded her agreement to these reasonable precautions. The next morning, she departed the ship with a small communicator and a modest amount of credit that Kale had insisted she take just in case. Her posture as she walked down the ramp was straight, purposeful, though Kale could see the tension in her shoulders. The hours of her absence were among the longest Kale had experienced in recent memory. He busied himself with maintenance tasks aboard the Nomad, checking the communicator frequency periodically, though it remained silent. When Lyra finally returned, nearly 5 hours later, the relief Kale felt was profound. She entered the ship carrying a small package wrapped in simple material. Her amber eyes were bright with a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. "I purchased this," she said without preamble, extending the package toward Kale. "For you, with the credits you gave me." Surprised, Kale accepted the package and carefully unwrapped it. Inside was a navigational compass of unusual design, clearly handcrafted, with intricate etchings around its casing that reminded him somewhat of the patterns on Lyra's crystal prism. The vendor said it was made by the Turellian nomads. Lyra explained, watching his reaction intently, that it always points toward home, however you define it. I thought, for your ship, the Nomad should have a proper compass. The thoughtfulness of the gift left Kale momentarily speechless. It wasn't merely that Lyra had purchased something. It was that she had observed enough about him to select something meaningful, something that connected to their shared experience. It's perfect, he said finally, running his fingers over the finely crafted object. Thank you, Lyra. Her smile, genuine, unguarded, transformed her face in ways that her practiced, servile expressions never had. I spoke with many different beings, she continued, her words tumbling out more freely than ever before. I observed how they interacted. No one treated me as a servant. No one questioned my right to be there. I was just another person. That night, as the outpost's artificial day cycle dimmed to simulate evening, they sat together in the main cabin, sharing a meal comprised of their usual ship's rations supplemented by fresh items from the outpost markets. Lyra had selected several of these herself during her independent exploration. What happens after we leave here? She asked, the question that had been hovering between them for weeks. Kale set down his drink, giving himself a moment to formulate his response. That depends partly on what you want, he said carefully. I have another survey mission scheduled in the Verdant system. After that, I'm open to possibilities. Could I continue traveling with you? Lyra's question was direct, her gaze steady despite the vulnerability inherent in asking. Of course, Kale replied without hesitation. For as long as you wish. But there are other options as well. The Guild has rehabilitation programs for beings who have been displaced. They could help you establish legal identity, find work suited to your interests, even relocate to worlds where Xylithian influence never reached. Lyra considered this information, her expression thoughtful. And what would you prefer? The question caught Kale off guard. For weeks, he had been careful to emphasize Lyra's autonomy, to never impose his preferences on her choices. But now she was asking directly for his perspective, and he owed her honesty. I've grown accustomed to your presence, he admitted. The ship feels more alive with you here. But my preference shouldn't influence your decision. This is about your future, not mine. Perhaps they're connected, Lyra suggested quietly. Perhaps what I want is to find out if they could be. The implication in her words hung between them, neither willing to be the first to acknowledge it directly. Finally, Kale spoke, his voice gentle but serious. Lyra, you're just beginning to discover who you are without the constraints of your conditioning. I would never want to become another form of influence on that process. There's a difference between influence and control, Lyra pointed out, echoing his own words from days earlier. I understand that now. All beings influence each other. The difference is in whether we're free to accept or reject that influence. Her perception stunned him. In just weeks, she had grasped nuances of interpersonal dynamics that some never understood in a lifetime. That's remarkably insightful, he acknowledged. I had a good teacher, she replied with a hint of smile. One who taught by example rather than command. The following day, their final one at the outpost, Lyra ventured out alone again. This time, Kale felt less anxiety about her independence, recognizing it as the necessary step it was. When she returned, there was something different about her, a subtle change that he couldn't immediately identify. It wasn't until they were preparing for departure that he realized what had changed. She had altered her appearance slightly. Her silver blue hair, previously worn in the elaborately formal style of a Xylithian servant, had been cut to a shorter, simpler length. The rigid perfection was gone, replaced by a style that framed her face in a way that seemed more her. You cut your hair, he observed as they completed the pre-launch checks. Lyra's hand went to the shortened strands, a gesture of self-consciousness but not regret. Yes, the old style was not mine. It was designed to please others. This is simpler, more practical for life aboard a ship. She hesitated before adding, Is it acceptable? It's not for me to find acceptable or unacceptable, Kale reminded her gently. But if you're asking if I think it suits you, then yes, very much so. Her smile and response held a new confidence. As the Nomad disengaged from the outpost and set course for the Verdant system, Lyra took her place beside Kale at the navigation console. not as a servant, not as a passenger, but as something new and still evolving. A partner, perhaps. A friend, certainly. The stars streamed past the viewport as they accelerated to jump velocity. Lyra watched them, her amber eyes reflecting the light of countless possibilities. "It's strange," she said softly. "On Xylos, I begged you to let me serve you because I couldn't imagine any other way to exist. Now I can't imagine returning to that life." "You don't have to," Kale assured her. "That life is behind you." Lyra nodded, her gaze still fixed on stars. "Not forgotten," she clarified. "I don't think I should forget it. It shaped me, for better or worse. But it no longer defines me." She turned to face Kale directly. "I'm ready to discover who I am beyond it, who I might become." As the Nomad prepared for the jump to faster-than-light travel, Kale reflected on their unlikely journey together. From a desperate encounter in the ruins of an ancient temple to this moment of shared purpose and possibility. He had gone to Xylos seeking artifacts of a dead civilization and had instead found something far more valuable, a living being in the process of reclaiming her own humanity or whatever the Xylithian equivalent might be. Jump sequence initiated, the ship's system announced. Lyra reached out, her slender fingers briefly touching Kale's hand on the control panel. A gesture of connection, freely given and freely received. "Ready?" Kale asked, the question encompassing far more than just the imminent jump. Lyra's amber eyes met his, clear and certain. "Ready," she confirmed. The stars elongated into streaks of light, and the Nomad leapt into the vast unknown, carrying its two occupants toward whatever future they would choose to build together.